Good evening. On behalf of the FLENJ Professional Development Committee, I would like to welcome you to FLENJ's 5th web chat for educators for the 2017-18 school year. This evening's web chat is entitled Interviewing for World Language Teaching Positions. My name is Amanda Seawald, and I am the current president of FLENJ. I will be hosting this evening's web chat. Our web chat series is a new professional development offering to the world language education community. They're designed to bring important ideas and conversations to our members through the experts on our board. Please note that the audio and video of this web chat will be recorded. I'll provide you with details about how you can access the on-demand recording at the end of the web chat. The web chat is scheduled to last 1 hour, with 45 to 50 minutes devoted to the presenter. The remaining time will serve as Q&A with the presenter to answer your questions. If you'd like to ask a question of the presenter during the presentation, please use the chat box in the GoToMeeting control panel on the side of your screen and type in your question. We will organize these questions and share them with the presenter at the end of the presentation and during as we see fit. As a registered live participant, you are eligible to receive a certificate of attendance stating that you've signed up for and logged into this web chat. Details on how to receive this will be shared with you at the end of the web chat. FLENJ cannot guarantee any professional development credit for this, but for those watching this on demand at a later date, FLENJ is unable to grant a certificate of attendance. All participants are encouraged to work with their immediate supervisor to determine how best to receive credit for this professional development. In the event of technical difficulties, please remain connected to the web chat as you are able. FLENJ will contact you directly if the problem cannot be resolved. You may also email us at president@flenj.org, but please understand that it is sometimes not possible to check email and run the web chat simultaneously. Thank you so much for your time and attention to these messages. And now, please let me take this opportunity to introduce you to our presenter, Frank Ruggiero. Dr. Frank Ruggiero is the K-12 coordinator of World Languages and ESL in the Nutley Public Schools. Prior to becoming a department supervisor, he was a world language teacher in the Edison Public Schools, where he taught French and Spanish for 15 years. Dr. Ruggiero has also been an adjunct professor at Fairleigh Dickinson University's Florham campus in Madison, New Jersey. After studying both French and Spanish at Drew University, he worked in international business and in French translation before joining the teaching profession. As a teacher, he completed his MAT in French and his EDM in educational administration from Rutgers. Dr. Ruggiero also holds an EDD degree in educational administration. Oh, sorry, that's what he said. His dissertation research focused on how middle school interdisciplinary teaming affected members of a school community whose approach to teaming included core subject teachers, but excluded world language and all other related arts. Great information. In addition to his current role as president-elect, Dr. Ruggiero has served as treasurer of FLENJ and co-chair of the 2016 annual conference. Since the conference, he has been the coordinator of the 16 and 17 and 17-18 professional development workshop series. And we look forward to having Frank become our president in May. Frank, welcome to the webinar.
Hi, Amanda, and welcome to everyone on the webinar. Thank you for having me.
Yes.
I'm very excited to be doing this. A little bit nervous on my first web chat, so if there are any technical difficulties, I hope that everyone will be understanding. If you have any questions, please type them in, and Amanda will share them with me. She's already given a little bit of background about myself and what I've done and what I've taught in my current role. So I want to give a little bit of background about the rationale for this web chat. You see, I feel like when you are in school, you get plenty of preparation to do the job you're searching for. Little to no preparation to actually get the job you're searching for. I found this in trying to become a world language teacher and to become an administrator most recently. My experience as supervisor has been just for the past couple years, but I've learned a lot, and in looking at people's applications, I see that there's a lot of incomplete information on their application materials. Sometimes their cover letters are honestly not so good, so I don't really read them. The resumes don't necessarily wow me, so I'm not drawn in to want to read about the person. And honestly, sometimes people come into an interview and they're really not prepared. Oops, forgot to click. I want to first acknowledge Foreign Language Educators of New Jersey for organizing this web chat series. I think it's a great benefit. There are a couple of members of the board of directors who specifically helped me with this web chat preparation, including Kathy Stotler and Michelle Schreiner. And in the district in which I work, there are principals and supervisors who gave me questions and answers to share with you during the web chat. And there is also a former supervisor of world languages who wished to remain anonymous, who also contributed to the web chat. So tonight's agenda is basically, as you see on the screen, just to give you a quick overview of the application process, then to certainly go into a little bit about the cover letter and resume, some sample questions that you may encounter during an interview, and to give you some interview advice from some sitting administrators in a couple of different districts. Finally, I'll very briefly mention what may come after the interview in terms of second round interviews and demo lessons, but that will be very quick. So to begin, the process is usually started with you looking for a position on district websites, occasionally in newspapers. That's not all too common, but certainly looking on a website like K12jobspot.com. So this is an actual live link. I'm sure you mostly know about this, but I thought I would quickly navigate to it. You have the option to allow the browser to see where you're located. Usually though, for anything, I would just search by state, and you can navigate down to New Jersey here. And over on the left, you can filter by distance, category, and how recent the posts are. You're certainly going to want to look for world language teaching positions. Take, for example, high school, and they do refer to it as foreign language. But if I click there and then go over to the main page, you can see that the posts are starting to come in. You should be aware that many districts are going through replacing people who are retiring, people who have resigned, and even some non-renewals, I hate to say, will be coming up. So now is the season to start looking for positions on K12 JobSpot. The application is almost always on AppleTrack. Snail mail is very rare at this point. And then when this information comes in, there are administrators who review the applications. We are able to search and filter by certain criteria, whether there is a certain amount of experience or a certain degree level that we're looking for. And there are sometimes tons of applicants, so you really want to try to put something in there that's going to stand out. Later, I'm going to speak about the resume very quickly, and you want that, we get a thumbnail picture. And if it looks attractive, I'm going to look at it. There are some districts who will contact you for a screening. Some districts, like the one in which I currently work, will do a screening by phone. It's usually by the content supervisor. And then you'll certainly be invited in for a formal interview with a supervisor and some additional people. There may be more than one person, there may be two, there may be three, you really don't know. Feel free to ask when the interview is set up. In my current district, we are able to set up the interviews through the AppleTrack email system. It's a great way to be able to track our email correspondence with applicants. After you have an interview, a demo lesson may be requested to select final candidates. If that's the case, it's usually a good indication that you are under serious consideration, and or that honestly the committee hasn't been able to make their final determination based on the information you provided during the interview. References are usually called for the final candidate, and then the candidate who is chosen is recommended to central administration for hire. That's an HR person, an assistant superintendent, or the superintendent his or herself, and it's he or she who recommends you to the Board of Ed for approval.
Frank, can you tell me a little bit before you apply, if you were going to give advice to someone before they were applying, what would some of your advice be?
Sure. I think I can give a little bit of advice from the current position I'm in now, and also as a teacher who has worked with many teachers. You should probably first want to consider, where do you want to work? Think about geographic location. What might seem easy to get to in the middle of the day at 2 o'clock or at 10 in the morning for an interview won't be necessarily that easy during rush hour. So you want to consider location, and you also want to consider the levels you want to teach at. There are probably certain candidates, including myself, who have a certain preference or a specialty in a certain level. So certainly give clear consideration to whether you want to be an elementary, middle, or high school language teacher. I have had teachers who very early into their teaching in the district have already requested a transfer to a different level, and that doesn't look so good, because then you start to wonder, does the person really know him or herself? Did they take the position just to get a job and and will they last? Start to think about why you want to teach language. You may be asked that question. Why do you want this job, and where is your interest from? Be prepared to speak to your passion.
I think that's such an important point that you make there, Frank. I think that being able to give a reason for why you are passionate about language learning and cultural understanding are such important pieces to who we need to be today in our profession.
I agree, and a committee wants to see that passion come through. If it's not coming through during the interview stage, they may have doubts whether that passion will come through during your instruction in the classroom. And sometimes, one of my advisors once said to me that students don't care about how much you know, they just want to know that you care. And students want to know that you care about them and care about what you're teaching. And you also want to be qualified, of course. So be prepared to speak to your background. When you speak about your background, remember that the committee has mostly read your resume, so be prepared to speak to highlights in your resume. And you need to know something about the district in which you are applying. So they may ask you outright, why do you want to work here? Be prepared to answer that. So now I'll speak a little bit about the application, the cover letter, and the resume. AppleTrack is an online system that is usually your formal application for a job at this point. You want to be truthful, you want to be exact, you want to be detailed. You don't want the person reviewing the AppleTrack applications to be guessing as to whether you have a certificate of eligibility or a certificate of eligibility with advanced standing or a standard certificate. You want to upload all pertinent documents in PDF form, including your certifications and transcripts. Most recently, the state has gone to a system where they are not issuing paper certificates, but they do issue a summary of the certificates you have, along with the certificate numbers. So make sure that's posted, because if you are chosen, they will be confirmed. In AppleTrack, you might also want to be aware that we as administrators have the ability to make notes on applications. Certainly, if you come in for an interview, we will be able to take notes and make quick notes. And then if you're ever applying again for a similar or even a different position in the district, there could be notes there on your candidacy. Make PDFs of your cover letter and resume. Don't scan them in. You want them to look kind of nice. And there are always two questions that appear for teachers. These are the default questions from AppleTrack. Describe the skills or attributes you believe are necessary to be an outstanding teacher. And how would you address a wide range of skills and abilities in your classroom? You should prepare these answers, save them as a Word document, and be able to put them in when it comes up. You can kind of tell when someone has typed their answers in on the fly. So that's my suggestion for those standard questions that always appear.
Frank, I have a question for you. I just wondered, how do you select references, and do you suggest that people send letters of recommendation as well?
There is a portion in AppleTrack for you to mention references by name and how you know them, and upload PDFs of letters of recommendation. Definitely you want to try to select people who can speak to your current background, people who have supervised your work. Try to spread them out from amongst the positions you may have had, keeping in mind that the most current is probably the most useful to a hiring person. If you can't ask your current supervisor or principal to write something for you, if you are in a school district, try to get something as recent as you can. And I would also recommend that you keep your reference list to 3, maybe 4 if you have a long career. In the end, if we have to reach out to people, we're probably only going to have time to call 3 to 4. And generally, references are positive, so we don't need to ask more than 3 to 4 people. If we feel that we have to, then your candidacy for a position is really questionable.
Frank, one other question that I had for you is, when you look at the letters of recommendation, you look at the references, is there anything in particular that as a supervisor you're looking to see or hear from that reference?
Well, as I said, there are letters of recommendation that are always very generic and always positive. So invariably positive, actually. Otherwise, why would that person be writing a letter for you? Hopefully that person can speak to your character, can speak to your abilities as them or he or she supervising your work. And hopefully the letter of recommendation isn't just a summary of your resume. I wrote in my notes for this evening, that's no bueno. Honestly, I did have someone I asked to write a recommendation for me once. He asked for a copy of my resume and basically wrote my resume in paragraph form. I used that letter while I had to, but it has since been removed from my applications anywhere. You also have to provide a cover letter. And I would highly suggest that you personalize the letter with district information. To whom it may concern really shows you haven't done research or you haven't taken the time to do research. Address it to the superintendent and HR director, even the department supervisor. So this does mean you may end up with multiple Word documents on your hard drive, and that's okay. Be sure always to update the date on the top. I have seen cover letters where the date is not recent, or they have actually addressed the previous superintendent, so be sure that that information is correct. In your cover letter, avoid having a summary of your resume and just try to highlight the accomplishments and qualifications, especially if they don't make the final cut into your resume.
And Frank, I think you have a sample here. I'd love to see it. And I think that one of the most important things that we can point out and that you can certainly share, again, like the letter of recommendation, what is it that stands out to you when you look at a cover letter that might make you pick someone other outside of another candidate?
Well, as I said, someone who talks about their background, their passion, something that draws your eye in from the beginning. In case this link didn't work, I put an actual letter that I've received permission from a current teacher in my district to post. As you can see, it's addressed directly to Dr. Julie Glazer, who's the current superintendent in Nutley. She starts off by stating what position she's applying for and giving her credentials. She tells a little bit about her philosophy. She mentions that she's a native speaker and how her ESL background has contributed to her career and being able to teach a foreign language. And then she goes into a couple of characteristics about her personality. And so a letter like this is different than reading someone's resume. The resume should have certain information in it, of course. Make sure that your contact information is there, up to date, an email address, easy to check at any time during the day. Clearly list your qualifications, whether they are advanced standing certificate or not, or standard. If you have praxis scores, you may wish to list those, your teaching experience, and try to delineate the grade levels and languages you've taught and the accomplishments you've had. And don't bother mentioning that references are available on request. That's a waste of valuable resume space. Obviously, they should be available. Mention other work that you've had in the teaching profession. Have you been part of a committee? Have you had any leadership roles? Because the eventual person who hires you wants to see that you're going to be a contribution to the new district that you're applying to. If you have professional development involvement, if you're part of FLENJ or any other organization, certainly list those. And if you've done any presentations, list your work there. And this all sounds like quite a bit. So you want to keep your resume to a reasonable length, especially if you're new to the career. What is your rationale for more than one page? So use the space wisely. And if you do have to go on to 2 pages, it's probably best not to fill 2 pages because no one's going to want to read that.
Frank, just one other thing before you go on. I think it's really important to point out how important the professional organization involvement is. I know from my own professional experience, being able to explain my involvement and any leadership roles I've taken in professional organizations really helps people see your level of commitment and also your passion for what you do. So
I certainly agree, Amanda, and I think it keeps you current. I think it keeps you current in the conversation about what language education is like right now. And then you show that off, especially to a department supervisor whose background is world language. That's certainly going to win you some respect. Just some other quick resume tips, and you can Google these, make the top count, incorporate skills into your teaching experience, and watch the timeline. What's more recent is more important, and focus what you have there. I would suggest losing the objective at the top of the page, because obviously we know what job you're looking for. You're interviewing for a job teaching Spanish. So unless it's a sales pitch where you basically give a summary about yourself that's going to draw us in, there's really no point in having an objective. I do have a candidate who had a resume that looked like this, and I like the career profile, starting off on the top here. It's something quick to read, and then the areas of expertise is a little bit long, so that might be a little shortened. But if you're going to have something like this, make sure it's powerful. Consider your formatting. Spacing is very important. White space is important. Your font size and your font choice is important as well. And in this day and age, you can use color, but it has to be very judicious use of color. Remember, we're probably going to print them out on a black and white printer, and committee members will see black and white versions. So just Googling on the internet, I found some examples of before and after, and even though these resumes that you're about to see don't come from the education profession, I think you'll agree that the one on the right is far more eye-catching. She lists her information at the top, and it's very clear and easy to read. It's very bulleted. I have another one to show you, very similar, with skills on the right side and the background and experience on the left. And then when I was looking to update my own resume, I found these quite by accident, looking up what your resume should look like in 2018 at the time. And I found in Money Magazine has things like this posted. So use these to guide your work. The visual appeal is very important. So I was going to pause if there were any questions.
If you have any questions, you can certainly type them into the chat box. If not, we'll go forward, and then you can save your question for a little bit later as we continue to hear Frank's great ideas about interviewing for world language positions.
And that's where I'm going with it right now, the interview.
Perfect.
You're going to meet various people. Keep that in mind. You may have central office administrators depending on the size of the district. You may meet various people during an initial interview or a follow-up interview. When you prepare for your interview, be sure that you're prompt. You don't want to be there too early, but be there early enough. If that means that you have to sit in your vehicle outside of the Board of Education office or the school for a little while to walk in at just the right time, I would recommend that. I've had people show up a half hour early, and it's a little bit awkward, to be honest. If you have a portfolio, be sure to bring it. It should be an appropriate length. Don't make it too long. Don't make it too short. It should be long enough as your legs are to reach the ground, and that varies on every individual, so your portfolio length will also vary. And then do your research. Know the district. Find out whom you're meeting, a little bit of background about the schools, about the department, the languages that are offered. If I navigate to the webpage of my current district, you can read some text about the department, what the goals are, what the languages are, and you can even get a gauge for the size of the department by scrolling down and seeing the teachers' names and where they teach and what the schools are. So I highly, highly recommend that you do that. During the interview, and these are just good techniques, be sure you focus your answers, watch your rate of speech, focus on what you can do for the district, and you want to stand out from the crowd. So now the actual topic of the interview, of the web chat, was about interview questions, and I finally reach it. And what I've done is basically grouped questions to various types, and I, as a supervisor, I group my questions and I assign them to different individuals. I make sure that if there's someone whose background is special education, they ask about differentiation. I make sure if there's someone who has a background in special classroom management techniques, that he or she asks that question. I usually try to ask the questions about content and world language. If they're about second language acquisition theory, teaching methods, and then you may certainly get some scenario questions and personality questions too. So here are the questions, and instead of going through each one, because we certainly don't have the time, I'll make a few comments about a couple that are in red, and you can take a look at the others. And these have come from different supervisors of world language and even some other subject areas too. This question in red, about discipline, shows not just that you have a discipline policy, but that you think ahead and that you value classroom management. Can you have proactive routines and policies in place for your class? And it just shows your ability to think out what you're going to do before it actually happens.
Right, Frank, I completely agree with that. And I just want to, mention that to me, that stands out as well, because with regard to the world language instruction, if we're thinking about how we're going to approach target language instruction, it's so essential to make sure that we have comprehension checks and ideas like that that actually help us model a well-managed world language classroom and not necessarily always get to so many issues with discipline if we have that planned up front.
That's absolutely correct. And I've also always been a person who thinks that if you have strong teaching methods and good teaching methods, you probably avoid a lot of disciplinary issues in your classes. Now, that's not a guarantee, but without strong teaching, you're certainly opening yourself up to issues in discipline.
I would totally agree with that statement.
These are some questions about teaching methods, and one of my favorite questions that I actually inherited from someone and that I use currently is, please describe a successful lesson, then describe an unsuccessful lesson. It shows that you can be objective about the work that you've done, and then we follow it up with what would you do differently to turn that unsuccessful lesson into a successful one. And it shows that you can evaluate and also be critical and figure out how to improve, because after all, teaching is somewhat of an art, and every day is not going to go perfectly. My mentor once said, not every day is going to be a stellar lesson. So how can you constantly strive to improve?
And certainly we, as a profession, we tend to be hardest on ourselves, right, Frank? We tend to think that we have to be perfect all the time. But one of the most important skills that I think any teacher has these days is the ability to be reflective and to reflect on what they've seen, what they've done, and where they can go from there.
I cannot agree more. And especially in this age where evaluation is there's such a societal push on evaluation, especially in our state. People who evaluate you are going to look for you to be able to reflect on your work and actually write about your reflection on your work. And that is actually evaluated. In the Danielson model, it's domain 4. And in other models of evaluation, that certainly comes into play as to whether you can evaluate your own work and show professional growth. Amanda, earlier you mentioned a little bit about assessment, and this will certainly come up during any interview, formative versus summative assessment, and how are you going to assess that students have learned what you've tried so hard to teach. So make sure you take time to talk about informal assessment and formal assessments. If you know the difference between formative and summative assessments and can speak in theoretical terms, that will win you some points, especially if you can link that to your teaching. And make sure you talk about giving students feedback. It's got to be timely, and you don't want it to just be very good work. You want to give them feedback that will help them improve, just like you would want from someone evaluating you with tips and suggestions for improvement as you go on. Differentiation is a big topic. Sometimes there'll be someone invited, perhaps a special education supervisor, to join in an interview and ask you some questions like this. So what strategies will you implement to meet varying ability needs and varying levels of language? I can certainly easily speak to various levels of language. Make sure that you are scaffolding your language instruction and talk about that. What do you do? How do you provide support for the students who are struggling? And certainly talk about your grouping strategies. How do you use data to group students, whether homogeneously or heterogeneously? Make sure that you talk about the times that you have or that you will tier your activities for students of varying levels of language and also varying ability levels. One question I want to point out, though not in red, is how do you feel about special education accommodations? This is kind of a trick question, so keep that in mind. No one's really looking for your personal opinion about special education accommodations. They're irrelevant. We want you to speak to your ability to meet the requirements that are set forth in IEPs and the accommodations that are set out for students, and that you have an understanding of that and that you will honor that. Don't try to speak to your personal feelings at all, because that's not the point of the question.
Frank, I just have a quick question for you. Just with regard to some of the things that you've said here, a quick idea about all of this, these questions. They're wonderful guidelines if I'm going into an interview to be able to review this. But in general, not all of those questions are asked in each interview. Wouldn't you agree?
I would agree. Some from each category. That's what I would do when I plan my interview questions. There are districts, I believe, in which there are a certain predetermined set of questions that every teacher will be asked. And in other districts, like my own, where the content supervisor kind of drives the process. And whether the case is centrally driven or driven from the department and a supervisor, you'll probably get asked questions from various categories. And the questions will become, I don't want to say more difficult, but more in-depth, especially if you are called back in for a second interview.
And so the most important skill here, it seems, is that you've really reflected, you've thought about your answers to these ideas, and that you've thought about how you would address different issues in your classroom, and really can pull from your own experiences in order to discuss that when asked.
I would agree. And one of the comments that I'll make momentarily is that, and I've done this in looking for positions myself, when you leave the interview, you go out to your vehicle, you get out your pad or you get out your phone and record and start to jot down the questions you were just asked, so that as you plan for the next interview, you can reflect on the answers, the things you wish you would have said, the things you could have said, and improve for next time. And that will be very important to you. When you talk about meeting with other people and collaborating with the school community, sometimes I believe I mentioned earlier, or it's on a slide, teachers may be invited to, actual teachers in the world language department may be invited to participate in the interview. And they're going to pay particular attention to questions like the last one. How do you form effective and productive collaborative working relationships with your colleagues? It's not just a matter of whether you can work with them, but they're also looking to see whether they can work with you. And keep in mind this question of collaboration between you and the district as a whole in which you're applying. I know I was guilty of this, you start to wonder if there's something wrong with you as to why you're not chosen or you don't move forward in the process. But keep in mind, the district or the school has a whole set of needs that they're trying to meet. And you may be an excellent candidate, but you may not fit their need at this time. So keep in mind that not only do you always want to try to speak to how you can help the district and move the district forward in their goals and philosophy, but you might just not fit and be able to collaborate at that moment in time. So that's a little piece of advice that's a little off topic that kind of comes in at this moment. The biggie, content in world language, that's my term for it, but what do you know about second language acquisition theory? There are some questions that can be a little technical that you'll be asked about the roles of L1 and L2, so be prepared to understand those terms. Be sure to reference the New Jersey state standards, modes of communication, talk about ACTFL, talk about integrated performance assessments and IPAs, whether you've created them or just used them. Use terms like target language use, comprehensible input, and how you value that in your language instruction. And also mention that it's important for students to have opportunities for language output. And all the while, always linking your knowledge about this theory, if you will, to what you can do in terms of instruction and to how it will benefit this district to which you're applying. You may get some scenario questions. I like to have a Spanish or a French teacher ask these questions in the target language. I don't usually let on that I can understand those languages and just see how the person reacts. But these are what would you do questions. And I really can't provide the answers for you. You have to take these down and think about them. And you can prepare as much as you want. You may get thrown a curveball as to what would you do if. So these kinds of scenarios sometimes ask you to think on your feet. They're usually in 4 categories, in my opinion. There's questions about what would you do with content. Describe day 1 in a language classroom, for example. Or they deal with classroom management and discipline issues. Certainly questions like the one here about your relationship with parents and how you deal with parent issues. And certainly, of course, your main clients, the students, how do you deal with their issues and their needs? These are scenarios that you may face in an interview. You may get some personality questions. Some of these are a little bit of a distractor, like the last one. If you were a color, what would it be and why? Who really thinks about that before an interview? But it kind of gives you the opportunity to show off your thinking process for the committee. The first question, though, is very valid. What are 3 adjectives that you can use to describe yourself? This gives you an opportunity to showcase your personality and to showcase your strength. Avoid weaknesses. And a question may be asked about what's your greatest weakness and how do you address it? This is a little bit of a trick question. I don't think interviewers are really looking for your greatest weakness in teaching the Italian language. They're looking for you to turn your weakness into a strength. So make sure you select something or mention something that doesn't necessarily impact your ability to complete the job that you may be hired for. And make sure that if it is a weakness that is indeed valid, that you are able to show how you're correcting it and turning it into a strength in your teaching career. And finally, some other questions, and these are some good ones, about constructive feedback. What was it, and what did you do with the information? We want to know that you can not only accept constructive feedback, but that you can think about it, and as you mentioned, Amanda, reflect on it and put it to good use in your instruction. And believe you me, when that observer comes in the next time, whether it be later in the school year or even the next year, not only are we able to reference previous observations, especially in this day and age with the electronic tracking of teachers' performance, but we remember where teachers are and where they need to grow, and we wonder, have they made any growth in the areas in which we've suggested? There's a principal in my district who asks a question about you being prepared to answer a question that you weren't asked. And finally, we will always end in any interview, I'm sure, do you have any questions for us? And you want to have a few ready, in my opinion, because you don't want to ask a question for which they've already provided the answer. So make sure you have a few good ones ready, and that you can select one that matches the conversation that you've been having. For example, if assessment has come up a lot, if you've talked about IPAs, ask about the district's philosophy about assessment. What kind of assessments are currently in place, and what do the current teachers use to grade their students, and things like that nature. And that shows that you have given thought before you come into an interview, and that you're interested, and you never want to have no questions. Although on the other end of the spectrum, you don't want to have a list of a dozen questions to ask either and pull a note paper out of your pocket.
I think that this is such a wonderful list of ideas, and everything that you've shared here is such a great way for someone to prepare and to think about this, but also to think about what their role is going to be in the world language education profession. Because everything that you've mentioned requires people to be most involved with current practice, aware of professional connections and professional organizations, of course, and just the ability to really understand where the standards are and how instruction reflects that. So I think these are just wonderful. I have a couple of questions that have come up here, Frank. Okay. I just wanted to share with you. The first one is, what if you don't want to ask your supervisor for a reference letter? Your current supervisor? Yes.
I think it's perfectly acceptable not to have a letter from your current supervisor. If it's your first position teaching, for example, you may have to go back to people who know your work as a student, and I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. Also consider supplementing those letters of recommendation with one letter from a colleague who knows your work on an equal basis, someone who can speak to what you've done in the classroom because he or she has had a great conversation with you about what you do in your classes and how you try to improve. And so it doesn't, I know I said earlier it's preferable that letters of recommendation come from those who have supervised your work, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, and second of all, are praxis scores necessary if they're more than 25 years old?
That's a great technical question. I'm not certain. If you have a standard certificate at this point, praxis scores probably are not going to be that important. If you have a very high praxis score, especially if it's recent, you may want to include that somewhere. But if you have a standard certificate, that's probably sufficient.
Yes, and a lot of districts look at OPIs as well as a way to continue linguistic growth for their teachers. So that might be another thing to look at down the road, is to participate in an
Absolutely. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because last year FLENJ had in the workshop series, we had Professor Joe Goebel from TCNJ speak for us, and I attended. And it was more geared towards supervisors and having supervisors prepare for, finding valuable and strong candidates for teaching language. And one of the questions he said you should or could ask of candidates is whether they have an OPI score or WPT, the writing score in the language that they're about to teach, and what that score is. So thank you for mentioning that.
Sure. And then one other thing, Frank, just a thought that I had. I think it's important. All of these ideas can be overwhelming, I'm sure, for anyone who is about to walk into an interview. But I think that it's so important to remember, and I'm sure you would agree, that the supervisors who are interviewing you, if it's the place you want to be, they're looking for a teammate. They're not looking for someone that they're just going to supervise, but for someone who's really going to be a member of their team and someone who's going to bring a positive energy to their department. So it's not, none of these things are meant to scare anyone, just to make sure that the qualities that they're looking for in a teammate are going to be realized.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I can speak. I've only been a supervisor for a short time, but in that short time, I've interviewed people, and in one instance, I came down to 2 candidates, and we even invited them back for a 3rd interview. To try to determine whom we wanted to go with. And the deciding factor was honestly personality and how we thought that person would fit in with the rest of the department. And that helped us to make the decision. But in terms of their strengths of responding to questions and knowing second language acquisition theory and answering all of the questions that I've thrown up there, any of those questions they were asked, they were equal. So that's a very good point, Amanda.
Thank you for sharing.
So in moving forward, I got some actual advice and some actual questions, other questions from administrators. I'll just kind of read through some of the titles and mention a few things. This one came from a middle school assistant principal, and there's actually 2 slides speaking about confidence and experience. And I'll tell a personal anecdote in the next slide. But if there's an experience you don't have, try to show that you have the confidence to deal with the experience when it does come your way. Turn the question from something that you don't have into something that you do have. And that was exactly the blunder I made. This elementary principal suggested that you never say, no, I don't have that experience. This happened to me, where I was asked about whether I had high school language teaching experience, and I said no. I was a middle school language teacher, and I know that I had points taken off for that. And I don't think I followed it up strongly enough with what I could offer in its place. So certainly be sure to mention situations that you've been in and experiences that you've had that would help you. This is a great tip from an elementary school principal, especially for language teachers, because you are often, as she said, thrown into a classroom that's not your own. Elementary teachers rarely will have their own classrooms, so you want to be able to speak to your flexibility. How will you structure your day? How will you maneuver from classroom to classroom? And in my district, certainly from school to school, I do have a couple of Spanish teachers that during a week's time, they are in 4 different buildings. And what do you do with that portfolio? You put all this time into it, and sometimes we see candidates bring it in and you don't use it. We ask you questions that we want to know the answers to. This principal said our questions are for what we want to know, but you should be telling us what you want us to know. And when you answer your questions and tell us what you want us to know, if you have an example in that portfolio, feel free to reference it. Especially if your portfolio is not too long, you can quickly get to it and show that off.
You know, Frank, I wanted to just say something about the portfolios. I think it is so essential. There are so many times that I regret not having pictures, not having, you know, samples of pieces that some of my students have done because I'm so busy in the moment teaching them. And I do have to say that I think that developing that portfolio and just having things that you can refer to right then and there when you're asked a question, and just for your own ability to show what you've done and to be able to reflect on what you've done is so important as well.
I certainly agree. And if you have ever had to reflect on your work as a teacher, you've been teaching a few years, you remember how the current evaluation system has kind of taken hold. And at the end of the year, you have to reflect on your work and often provide artifacts. When you do that, do kill 2 birds with 1 stone and put some of those materials into a binder, put them into a page protector and with sections. And you're kind of doing 2 jobs at one time. And then when the time comes that you may look for a position, you already have a bunch of resources ready to go. One of the supervisors in my district, and not all of these quotes are actually from world language supervisors. This was from an English department supervisor. She wants to know that you can not only just spew off facts, but what you've done and what you would do. Earlier, I mentioned about doing research, and this supervisor said that she can't stand it when there are candidates who will ask questions to which the answers are clearly posted on the school or the district website. It shows you haven't prepared. Have you not taken the time to see whether you would fit into that district? And she loves it when a candidate asks questions and is excited about what they find on the web page in terms of what's going on in the language department.
You know, Frank, I just want to mention one other thing about that. Doing your research before any type of meeting is so essential. And from my work in advocacy, I can tell you for sure that that's true. It also does not hurt to do a little bit of research on the person who's going to be interviewing you and knowing a little bit about their background, because you never know, maybe they went to the same college you did, anything like that. It's very good to have that information.
I agree. And I'm going to mention something about that momentarily in terms of thank you notes and knowing who you've interviewed with and a little bit about them. And then just 2 slides or so about favorite questions from department supervisors. How can what you do contribute to the total school curriculum and to a student's overall education? Because if you think about it, part of our work as language educators is to open students' minds. And if we take what we teach them in terms of linguistic ability, what can we help them with in the rest of their educational career? Now, very quickly, I'll just touch on what you may or may not want to do after the interview and what may or may not happen. Send a follow-up email. It may not get read very carefully, but it shows at least you took a moment to do that. You don't need to send something through snail mail. And what's great about it is it gives you an opportunity to showcase your interest again about the position. And if there were any things that during the interview that you did not have the opportunity to mention, or on that drive home, you're saying to yourself, oh, I wish I would have said, feel free to mention that in your quick email. And as I said earlier, write down every question you were asked, every single one. This is what I've done, keep it in a folder, and when it comes time to interview, prepare your best answers and practice. Hopefully then you'll be asked for a 2nd round interview, maybe even a demo lesson. Very quickly, a 2nd round interview means that they're interested. The district is interested in you. You've piqued their interest. Now you really want to clinch it and sell yourself. This is where the panel may be slightly larger. This is where current teachers in the department may take place, I should say, participate in the interview. And earlier I said questions may become more difficult or more challenging, and if so, this is where it's going to happen. And don't be surprised if you're asked to do a demo lesson. As I said earlier, sometimes that's what makes the decision for administrators as to whether this person or that person would be better suited to teaching Spanish or French in their school.
Frank, just a quick question about the demo lesson. I know you're going to talk about it in a moment, but one of the participants had a question about how long the demo lesson should be.
I would advise anyone to ask a couple of questions when the demo lesson is set up. Hopefully it's done via phone, but even if it's done via an email message, find out what the teaching period is like, what resources are going to be available, what supplies will be available, and be sure to bring any special supplies you may need because they may not be available. I personally don't take these as offensive questions. Instead, I feel that this shows that you're interested in planning ahead and planning a lesson that will work for the students. Also, ask about what the students are currently learning or something about the curriculum, what unit they're in, and then you can kind of match your lesson to what the students are currently doing. So feel free to ask about how long the period will be or how long they want you to teach. Make sure you have a lesson plan, provide it to all of the observers. You want to showcase your personality in the classroom. You want to be enthusiastic, and make sure that it is difficult. And we as interviewers, we take that into consideration, that you're standing or working with students that whom you don't know. So we take that into consideration, but make sure that you showcase your classroom management and what it would be like walking into your classroom it was almost like walking into your classroom in September when you walk in and do a demo lesson. And hopefully after all of this, you may be asked if it's okay for your name to be forwarded to the superintendent's office for an interview with him or her. Lots of superintendents try to meet with every single hire. I know that certainly happens in smaller districts like my own. And that's usually a pretty good indication that they'd like to move forward. The department supervisor or principal is not the one who offers you a position. That only comes from central office. And then certainly the position is only, in fact, offered when when your name appears on the Board of Education agenda. And I meant to mention this earlier, and I do apologize. If you are currently teaching, be sure that you do not resign from your current position until after the Board of Education has voted on approving you. So that more or less is, from soup to nuts, the things I've thought about in terms of interviewing for world language positions. And I wanted to see if there were any final questions before we finish up.
Well, actually, Frank, we have several questions. I just want to, first of all, just what a wealth of information you've shared. It's so fantastic, and so many people will benefit from this. We had a few questions. The first is it okay to reach out and follow up via phone or email with a district that you've sent in a snail mail application before they invite you to an interview?
I don't see why not. It never hurts.
I agree, yeah. Especially because snail mail, you never know these days.
Correct. A snail mail is no bueno. Right. But seriously, email is the way to go. And the worst thing that happens is that you don't get a response, but it certainly shows that you're interested. So yeah, I would suggest doing that. There's nothing wrong with that.
And another one is it frowned upon if you are leaving a current tenure track position, or is it okay to say that you're looking for a better fit?
I can't speak for all of the supervisors or building administrators out there. I wouldn't take it that way, because very often you do find yourself in a situation where the fit is not good, and you know that as the teacher. And you do have to sometimes come up with a reason that is better than your actual reason, and that can be a very valid reason. So I would feel free to use that if I were you.
And also, I mean, I would also say that it's very important I would think for you as a supervisor to know that someone can take a step back and say, maybe this isn't the right place for me before I go any further. So that's also not necessarily a negative. It can also be a very positive thing for someone to understand.
Absolutely, I agree.
And then Frank, just because you've done such an incredible job here, the last question I have here
I
is,
don't know if it's incredible, but I hope it was useful.
can we call Frank to do a mock interview or to get advice?
I would be down for trying that. Absolutely. Why not? And then we could talk about the experience. You know, on the next slide here, I mentioned some resources. Looking on the internet, especially for tips on how to format your resume, what to or not to include, and how to make it look good. Certainly having colleagues proofread your work and speaking with them. And then you have FLENJ. And just to do a little sales pitch, honestly, we do have plenty of resources available. We do have a job placement service that you can find on our website under the members only resources. We have links to specific organizations and some other various teaching resources that whether you're looking for a job or not, you may want to investigate. I'll show you very quickly since I think we have a moment still.
Yeah, and not to mention that just being involved with FLENJ, you get to meet so many people and be able to make connections that could help you with job placement later.
I can't agree with that more. I thank my lucky stars for my involvement in FLENJ. I think it has made me a better world language teacher, more connected to the profession. And when I was looking for a supervisory position, I felt that I could speak to a lot of things that I couldn't prior. So I certainly suggest that.
I feel
we have a row of tabs, and under resources, you can see information on the New Jersey Seal of Biliteracy, which is all the rage right now. The CAPS project, which includes work on rubrics and IPAs. There's job placement services, and if I click on that, for example, it invites you to join and become a member. So if someone wanted to contact me and reach out to me at my email address, I would certainly be open to that. And if you have other questions, you can contact me at my FLENJ address or even at my Nutley Schools address. I would be happy to help you in any way I can.
And Frank, you'll be sharing this this presentation. I know that we'll be able to send out the recording, but you'll also make this available to anyone who's looking for it, correct?
Absolutely, yes. If someone can't find it, they can reach out to me. And I believe, Amanda, this will be available as part of our PD offerings on our one tab on the website with all of our web chats in the web chat series. We were on number 5, and we've got several to go before the end of the school year.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Frank, for such an incredibly informative presentation. As I mentioned at the beginning of this web chat, it has been recorded, and the recording will be made available on request within a few days. Additional details will be sent out to you and to the general FLENJ membership on how it can be accessed. For those of you attending as registered live participants, after this web chat, we'll send you proof of attendance in the form of a certificate of completion. On April 28th, that's a Saturday at 9:30 a.m., which is a little different for us, please join us for our next web chat. Board member Kathy Stotler will discuss AP rubrics and global themes. For the remaining web chats of the 2017-18 academic year and to purchase previously recorded web chats, please go to www.flenj.org. And finally, we have the incredible FLENJ Annual Conference coming up on April 13th and 14th. You will not believe the amazing presenters we have. The opportunities to connect with colleagues are just endless. And I look forward to seeing all of you there. Frank, thanks again for everything, and thank you to all of you for joining us this evening. Have a great night.
Have a good evening, everyone, and thank you again. Good luck.